The cottage had not changed. The ivy still clawed at the warped wood, its leaves dead from the frost but clutching, as if unwilling to let go. Aminata stood in the frozen mud of the path, suitcase in hand, wind catching the edge of her coat and flapping it like a warning flag. She hadn't been here since she was 10, and now, the house that once held her laughter felt like it might devour her. Swayatakazu greeted her with silence. Not the tranquil kind, but a watching silence, taut and suspicious. The taxi had driven off too quickly, tires skidding on gravel. No one had met her at the gate. No one had offered condolences at the church. Just glances. Some curious, some bitter, all brief, like they couldn't look her in the eyes for too long without something rising to the surface. She turned the rusted key in the door. The lock groaned, resisting as if trying to warn her, and then gave way with a reluctant click. Inside, the air was stale. The sharp tang of mildew and long-dried flowers mixed with dust. Furniture draped in yellowed sheets lined the room like forgotten monuments. A photograph still hung crooked over the fireplace. Her mother, Elsbieta, in her nurse's uniform, eyes tired but young. No sign of her father. Aminata stepped inside and shut the door. The sound echoed more loudly than it should have. She moved through the cottage methodically, as if reclaiming it inch by inch. In the bedroom, moths had eaten holes through a hand-knit shawl. In the kitchen, old preserves sat clouded behind cracked glass. She ran her hand along the counter and found a child's height mark carved in the wood. Yim plus 10, written in her mother's neat script. 10. The age she had been when her father disappeared. That night, she lay in the single bed that once belonged to her parents. The sheets were clean. Someone had cared for them, probably a neighbor, but the mattress sagged under memories. She didn't sleep. Every creak felt like breath. Every gust outside felt like a whisper trying to slip in. At dawn, she went to the cemetery. The churchyard was still, its gate rusted open. Her mother's grave was fresh, no headstone yet, just a wooden cross and a small plaque bearing her name and dates. 1963 to 2023. A life lived in silence. She knelt, fingers brushing the cold soil. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. The wind answered with a long sigh through the trees. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Aminata turned slowly. A man stood a few paces away, middle-aged, gray stubble, coat fraying at the sleeves. She remembered him dimly. A neighbor's son, maybe? He looked at her, not with malice, but something worse. "Pity. Didn't think you'd come back," he said. No greeting. No name. I didn't either. She was a good woman. Kept to herself. Aminata nodded. The man waited a moment longer, then turned and walked off, boots crunching in the frost. No mention of her father. No question about where she had been. Just the unspoken understanding that her return was temporary. Unwanted. Back at the cottage, she began to clean. Cabinets emptied, floors scrubbed, drawers pulled open. The rhythm steadied her, made her forget the cold stares, the invisible barrier that still lingered around her skin. In the attic, she found dust and cobwebs, old books swelled from moisture, boxes of yellowed medical journals, and a wooden trunk. Inside were letters, receipts, and at the very bottom, hidden beneath folded tablecloths, a cassette recorder. She turned it over in her hand. The plastic was scratched, but the buttons intact. Tucked beside it was a bundle of tapes, each labeled in a sharp, precise script. June 1992, threats at school, voice in the dark, final recordings. Her father's handwriting. She sat on the attic floor, heart pounding in her throat. Slowly, she inserted the first tape. The recorder word, then clicked. Static. Then, if you're hearing this, it means they've let you back into the house. Or maybe you broke in, my girl. I wouldn't put it past you. His voice, deep, measured, laced with weariness. Alive. Aminata froze, the recorder cradled in her hands. Tears spilled without sound. Her father's voice, 2 decades lost, had found its way back. Through time. through fear, through silence, and it had begun to speak. The tape ended with a soft click, but Aminata sat frozen long after. Her father's voice still hung in the air, more real than her own breath. She rewound it, pressed play again. This time she didn't cry. She listened, not to the words alone, but to the spaces between them. The way his breath hitched before certain sentences. The muffled thump of something in the background, maybe the radiator in their old flat, or someone moving in the next room. She played the next tape. The label read, "Threats at School." My lecture on colonial linguistics was interrupted today. Again, the head of faculty called me into his office after. Said I was too political. I reminded him that language is political, that to teach African languages without context is to serve the same ignorance that carved the borders of my continent. He smiled like I'd confirmed his fears. Aminata paused. She remembered that smile. Not his, but the one worn by people in power when they wanted to diminish. She had seen it during her own university days, so civilized, so neutral, yet steeped in condescension. The tape continued. On my walk home, a group of teenagers followed me. Through stones. One of them shouted, "Go back to your jungle." I kept walking. I always keep walking. He laughed, but it wasn't humor. They don't understand, Aminata. I have no jungle. I was born in Kinshasa. Concrete, noise, smoke. But they don't want facts. They want fictions that make them feel superior. She listened for hours, sitting cross-legged on the attic floor as the daylight shifted and shadows climbed the walls. Each tape unraveled pieces of her father she never knew. His fears, his frustrations, his quiet fury. He spoke in Polish, French, sometimes Lingala. Occasionally, he addressed her directly. I hope one day you'll understand why I kept recording. Memory is fragile. Truth, more so. They can burn files. But not this. One tape was different. Its label, smeared by water, was barely legible. She inserted it. Static. Then, I found something. A letter slipped into my faculty mailbox. No return address. Typed on old paper. It warned me not to attend the town hall meeting next week. Said I was being watched. I thought it was a prank until I saw the same car parked near our house 3 nights in a row. Same man. Always reading the same newspaper. I walked past him once. He didn't blink. A pause. Then a deeper voice, as if he had moved closer to the microphone. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Aminata's hands trembled. She pressed stop. The attic was darker now. Dust danced in thin beams of light slicing through the roof slats. She wrapped the tapes in a scarf and carried them downstairs, placing them carefully on the kitchen table like sacred relics. Later, she walked into town. The streets were mostly empty, but she felt eyes. Behind curtains. Reflected in shop windows. 2 old men on a bench fell silent as she passed. One spat in the dirt. The post office door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside, a woman behind the counter looked up, her face stiffening. Yes, I need a padded envelope. And I'd like to know if there's a way to digitize cassette tapes locally. The woman blinked slowly. Cassettes. Yes. A long pause. Then, try the library in the city. Here, we only do mail. Aminata nodded. Took the envelope. Paid in cash. The woman didn't offer change until prompted. Outside, the cold had sharpened. A boy on a bicycle skidded past her and shouted something unintelligible. She turned, but he was gone. At the cottage, she packed the tapes back into their original suitcase and hid them under her bed. That night, she dreamed of her father. He was sitting at the kitchen table, the same recorder in front of him, his hands folded. He looked older than she remembered, but not tired. Just waiting. When she woke, the image clung to her. She knew now that her return wasn't just about closing a chapter. It was about opening one that had been sealed with fear. These tapes were not simply memories. They were warnings, breadcrumbs, and she had begun to follow them. The next morning brought a sky the color of wet concrete, and with it, the slow seeping dread that clung to Aminata's chest like smoke. She woke with the uneasy certainty that something had shifted in the night, some curtain pulled back, some boundary crossed. The tapes had altered the house. Or perhaps it was her that had changed, now listening for echoes in the walls. She dressed in layers, pulled her coat tight, and set out with a list of places in her mind. Not destinations, exactly, more like sites of memory, tethered to what little she could recall of her father's movements. The university annex where he once taught had long since closed, its windows now boarded and tagged with graffiti. She stood across the street, watching pigeons wheel above the roof, trying to picture him walking through those doors with his bag slung over his shoulder, face unreadable, mind already 2 steps ahead. She walked the path he would have taken home, past the riverbank with the sagging fence, past the statue of the nameless soldier with his rifle turned downward, and past the bakery that still bore his name in scrawled letters on one of the tapes. She spat in the bread today. Thought I didn't see. The bakery was closed. Dust coated the display glass. But the sign above the door remained, Chlebdomowy. In the square, she found the bench where he once described sitting, recording ambient sounds for a lecture. She sat now, recorder in her lap, but this time as listener. She played a snippet from one of the tapes. I was followed again today. Same brown coat. Same hat. He bought a pack of matches at the kiosk, never lit one. Just watched me cross the square. Aminata scanned the space around her. Children played by the fountain, their mothers chatting nearby. But something about the scene felt brittle. Too quiet. Too framed. As if the village had choreographed its innocence in anticipation of her gaze. She stood and walked toward the church. The doors were open, incense curling through the air like memory. Inside, a few parishioners knelt in pews, whispering prayers. She stayed near the back, looked at the altar, the same place where her father had once read a passage during a community event, something she vaguely remembered from a photograph now lost. In the side alcove, a display board listed the names of donors and past volunteers. Her mother's name was there, Elżbieta Kwiatkowska, but there was no mention of Jean-Baptiste. She turned to leave but nearly collided with an older woman entering. Oh, the woman said, stepping back. Her eyes searched Aminata's face, then dropped to her hands, to her scarf, to the color of her skin. You must be hers. Aminata nodded. I'm Elżbieta's daughter. A long pause. And Jean-Baptiste's. The woman winced at the name, covered it quickly with a smile. She was a good nurse. Helped my sister after her stroke. Quiet woman. Did you know my father? A sharper pause now. He wasn't from here. That doesn't answer the question. The woman straightened. I knew of him. People didn't talk much. He kept to himself. That's not what the tapes say. The woman's smile faltered. Tapes. I'm documenting his story. The real one. A flicker of something, fear or guilt, or perhaps the exhaustion of too many years of looking the other way moved across her face. Be careful what stories you wake up, she said, and turned into the pews. Aminata left the church with her fists clenched in her pockets. That night, she found herself drawn back to the attic. She turned on the recorder again. This tape was labeled Voice in the Dark. They knocked at the door. 3 sharp raps. I didn't answer. They waited. I heard them whispering. A lighter clicked. The smell of tobacco through the window. When they left, I found a note slipped under the mat. We are watching. For your daughter's sake, stop. Aminata pressed pause. Her heart thudded in her chest. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the threat or the fact that it had worked. Her father had tried to speak. The village had answered with silence shaped into warning. And now, with every step she took, every tape she played, she was retracing that same fragile boundary between truth and the price of telling it. The rock hit the window just after midnight. Not hard enough to shatter it, but with enough force to jolt Aminata out of her light, uneasy sleep. She sat up in the dark, heart pounding, listening for footsteps or voices. There was nothing. Just the wind rubbing tree branches against the eaves and the low hum of winter settling into the bones of the house. She crept to the window. Outside, the road was empty. No figures. No cars. Just footprints in the snow, uncertain how many, trailing off toward the woods. She didn't go back to sleep. By morning, the tension had grown close. Every corner of the cottage seemed to breathe. She noticed things she hadn't before. A hairline crack above the living room door frame, a new scratch on the back of the hallway mirror, and one of the tapes slightly out of place. Had she left it that way? She wrapped herself in her father's old coat, too large but warm, and walked into town again, not with purpose, but with defiance. She walked slower this time, looked people in the eye. Outside the grocery store, an elderly man grunted as she passed. She caught only one word, Zabradzona. Dirty. She stopped, turned. I heard that. He didn't respond, just spat near her boot and shuffled off. Inside, the shop was warm and smelled of pickles and yeast. She picked up a few things, bread, canned soup, a bottle of water, and stepped up to the counter. The woman behind it was young, barely 20, and wearing a bright blue sweater that clashed with her tight-lipped expression. Aminata placed her items down. The girl scanned them without a word. When Aminata handed her a card, she paused. Cash only. It says you take cards. The girl shrugged. Aminata held her gaze for a long moment, then placed a crumpled 50 zloty note on the counter. As she bagged her items, she asked, Do you remember Jean-Baptiste Lamingo? The girl didn't look up. My mother told me not to talk to strangers. I'm not a stranger. I lived here. Now the girl looked at her. Something cold and proud behind her eyes. You left. People don't forget that. Aminata stepped back out into the cold, each breath a plume of steam. At the end of the street, she saw the retired schoolteacher, Mrs. Pavlok, locking her gate. Her white hair was gathered into a tight bun, and she wore the same fur-collared coat Aminata remembered from childhood. She approached slowly. Mrs. Pavlok? The woman turned. Her eyes flickered with recognition, then carefully went blank. Yes, I'm Aminata, Elzbieta's daughter. A pause. Ah, yes, I remember. You taught me, and you worked with my father. Another pause. Briefly, he spoke highly of you. She didn't answer. I was hoping you could tell me more. About that time. About him. Mrs. Pavlok looked over her shoulder, as if checking who might be watching. That was a long time ago. I have his tapes. Tapes. He recorded everything. Names. Incidents. The threats. The note left under our door. Now the woman's face hardened. That's his word. You were there. So was I. Mrs. Pavlok's voice dropped. Do not come here digging up graves. We all had to live through those years. We did what we could. Aminata stepped closer. Did you help him? Or did you watch him drown? The woman's expression cracked. Just for a moment. A flicker of guilt? Or shame? I prayed for him, she said. That's all I could do. Aminata didn't reply. She turned and walked away. Back at the cottage, she found her mother's bedroom drawer stuck. She forced it open. Inside were letters, photographs, a dried flower pressed in wax paper. And at the bottom, beneath a pair of gloves, a diary. Elzbieta's handwriting. Familiar, slanted, precise. She opened it to the first page. October 1993. Jean says they're watching him again. He thinks I don't believe him. I do, but I'm scared. Not for him, for Mina. She doesn't sleep well anymore. I told him to stop speaking at the meetings. He said silence is a coffin. Aminata read for hours. The entries shifted in tone, from love to fear, from hope to despair. Her mother had tried to protect them, but in doing so, had helped extinguish the light that had once defined her father. I told him once, maybe if we just keep quiet, they'll forget. He looked at me like I'd become one of them. Maybe I had. Aminata closed the diary. Her hands trembled. Outside, the sky was bleeding into dusk, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and fell silent. Fractures were everywhere, in the walls, in the town, in the past. And now, they were in her. But fractures also let light through. She picked up the recorder. Pressed record. My name is Aminata Lamingo Kwiatkowska. This is what they tried to erase. But I'm here. And I remember. Aminata lit a candle in the kitchen. Not out of sentimentality, Swiatekers's power grid had failed twice already that week. But the flame offered something the overhead bulbs did not, honesty. Its flicker made shadows dance across the walls, briefly animating the old house with a breath it hadn't taken in years. The diary set open beside her tea. She had dog-eared certain entries, not because they were the most dramatic, but because they revealed the slow erosion of a woman she thought she knew. Her mother's words were never overwrought, just precise, sparse, like someone whispering from a distance, hoping not to be overheard by herself. December 1993, they searched our house. No warrant, no explanation. I stood in the doorway and watched them go through Mina's toys. I wanted to scream. Jean said, "Don't." I didn't. The entries became erratic around the time her father disappeared. Some pages had only one line, others none. One page was soaked through tea or tears. Aminata couldn't tell. April 1994. Jean left today. Said he was going to Warsaw for a meeting, but he didn't take his coat. I think he knew he wouldn't be coming back. Aminata traced the line with her fingertip. No emotion leapt from it. No urgency. Just the dull thud of inevitability. Her mother had known, had watched it happen, had perhaps even made peace with the decision to let silence swallow the truth. But it was this entry, May 1994, that left her breathless. They told me to say he abandoned us, that he left for another woman. I said nothing. They said that was agreement. The next day, the church stopped calling. The neighbors stopped waving. The bakery raised its prices only for me. That's how a place kills you here, not with knives. With forgetting. Aminata closed the diary. Her tea had gone cold. She stood and looked around the kitchen, the same one her mother must have stood in every day for 20 years. Alone. Not quite mourning, not quite surviving. That evening, she returned to the tapes. She had saved one labeled simply Elżbieta. Her father's voice was softer on this one, less controlled. She stood in the kitchen tonight, drying plates. I asked her if she believed me. About the letter. The man. The car. She didn't answer. Just put the plate down, turned off the light, and went upstairs. Pause. She used to fight beside me. Now she just whispers, "Please." I don't blame her. The weight is heavier for her. This is her country. Her family. Her future. Me? I'm a guest who overstayed his welcome. Another pause, longer this time. I think they made her choose. And I think she did. Aminata stopped the tape. She pressed her hands to her face. Her skin was cold. Her breath shallow. In the silence that followed, her mother's absence filled the room, not as a ghost, but as a witness. Elżbieta had not been weak. She had not been cruel. She had been afraid. And when fear became the only language left, she spoke it fluently, like everyone else in this village. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and relentless. The next day, Aminata visited the municipal building. A low-slung structure painted a sickly beige, with the smell of old paper and new disinterest. She asked for public records. About her father. The clerk barely looked up. "We don't have anything on him. He worked here. He taught. He lived here for over a decade." The woman shrugged. "No file. Maybe he wasn't registered properly. He had a tax number. A residency permit. I remember going with him to sign it." The woman sighed and clicked through a few screens on her outdated monitor. "Try the Voivodeship archive in Kielce. If it's not there, it doesn't exist." Outside the building, Aminata leaned against the icy wall and pulled out her phone. No reception. Of course. She walked the length of the square again. Every step felt heavier. Not just from the snow gathering at her boots, but from the sense that she was walking through layers of absence, his, her mother's, her own. Later, at the cottage, she opened a drawer and found her mother's old nursing journal. Folded into the back was a clipping, yellowed, barely readable. University lecturer resigns following misconduct allegations. No name. No photo. But the date matched the last day her father had been seen alive. She turned the clipping over. On the back was a note, handwritten in hurried pencil. "This is how they make you disappear. Not with violence. With shame." Her mother had kept it. All these years. Elżbieta had stayed, alone, in this cold, breathing tomb of a village. Not because she was complicit. Because she had no place else to go. Aminata lit another candle. This one for her. The mother who had tried to survive erasure by becoming small, invisible, silent. But now, silence had become a wound. And wounds must be open to heal. Aminata left Świętokrzyż before sunrise. The road to Kielce twisted through frost-hardened fields, flanked by ghost trees and fences half-swallowed by snow. Her rental car's heater coughed intermittently, the engine growling at the incline, as if reluctant to carry her toward the place where the past might finally become paper. The regional archive sat in a concrete building wrapped in grime. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed, flickering slightly like they too remembered better days. The clerk behind the desk was a woman in her 50s with horn-rimmed glasses and hands stained with ink. I'm looking for any state records tied to a Jean-Baptiste Lamingo. He was a lecturer at the Pedagogical Institute in Ouagadougou from 1984 to 1994. The woman glanced at her, then at the request form. Family member? My father. The clerk's eyebrows didn't move. She typed. Slowly. The silence between keystrokes felt stretched, taut. Finally, she said, there's a file. Restricted. Why? No reason given. Marked under Internal Affairs. Can I access it? The woman studied her a moment longer. Then she stood and disappeared into the back. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Aminata paced the cold marble hallway, her footsteps echoing in rhythm with her pulse. When the woman returned, she held a slim folder in gloved hands. You didn't get this from me. She handed it over. Aminata didn't open it there. She waited until she was seated in the car, doors locked, breath fogging the windshield. The folder was thinner than she expected, no more than a dozen pages. But each word carved through her like glass. Subject, Lamingo, Jean-Baptiste. DOB, 1956. Nationality, Congolese, Perm. Resident. Status, monitored individual. The entries were terse, clinical. Surveillance summaries. Notes from university informants. A photocopied page of one of his lectures, highlighted and annotated. Potential subversive language. Underlined. Post-Colonial critique as veiled anti-nationalism. One entry dated March 1994 read, Subject continues organizing public forums under guise of cultural exchange. High attendance from university youth. Themes increasingly confrontational. Recommending disciplinary review. Another. Community tensions noted. Local reports describe subject as agitator. Letter intercepted from subject to embassy, held for further inspection. And finally, in darker ink, near the end. April 14, 1994, status change, subject neutralized. Closure initiated. No explanation. No cause. Just those words. Subject neutralized. Aminata's fingers went numb. Her father had not vanished. He had been made to vanish. Silently. Without violence in public view. Without protest. Without record. She looked again. At the bottom of the page, someone had scrawled in pen, Do not circulate. Archive only. Back at the cottage, she sat on the floor and laid the folder beside the diary, the tapes, the photograph. The weight of it was crushing not in quantity, but in certainty. All her life, she had doubted her own memory, had wondered if he had left them, if perhaps he had given up. Now, she had proof that he had fought, and that they had made the cost too high. She called Christian next. Her former university colleague in Brussels, now an editor at an independent European journal. I have something, she said. I'm listening. Over the next hour, she told him everything. The surveillance, the threats, the disappearance, the tapes. Send it all. Every document. We'll fact-check and run it. This needs light. Later that night, she opened one final tape, labeled Final Recordings. Her father's voice sounded frayed, exhausted. I think this may be the last one. I've been followed for days. I feel it. In the air. In the space between footsteps. They're closing in. I hope you never have to listen to this. I hope I'm wrong. Pause. But if I'm not, if this ends the way I fear, know that I stayed because I believed something could change. Because I believed in you. His breath caught. Speak, Aminata. Even if they don't want to hear you. Especially then. She wept then, not because it hurt, but because for the first time in years, she felt certainty bloom in her chest like a pulse. Her father had left a map, and she was no longer lost. There was no going back to forgetting. The file had drawn the line, and she would not let it be buried again. The loudspeakers crackled before the sound settled. A faint hum filled the square, unsettling in its familiarity, like a sound meant to remain buried. The folding chairs had been set in cautious rows, the same ones used for funerals and summer pageants. Few were occupied. A handful of elders sat stiffly, arms folded against the late winter chill. A pair of teens stood in the back, fidgeting. A local priest hovered near the church steps, expression unreadable. Aminata stood before them, the tape recorder balanced on the crate that doubled as her podium. Behind her, a printed banner fluttered weakly, in memory. In truth, she didn't speak first. She let the tape play. Her father's voice emerged, grainy and low. They said I was too loud, too proud, too foreign. But I only ever wanted to teach. To help you see the way language shapes power. They feared my voice not because it was angry, but because it was calm, deliberate, clear. They feared I would make you question what you'd been told. Someone shifted in the crowd. A cough. A seat creaked. Today, the dean called me in. Told me to reconsider my lectures. Said they made some students uncomfortable. That some parents had written letters. I asked if they'd read the material. He said it didn't matter. You must know your place, Jean, he said. The tape clicked softly. Aminata paused it. She looked at them. At their carefully neutral faces. The practiced detachment of people who had rehearsed forgetting so long it became their only tongue. This isn't just about the past, she said. It's about the silence that still lives here. The kind that lets someone disappear and then rewrites the reason. An old man in the front row, she remembered his name now. Yannick, owner of the hardware store, raised a hand slowly. You think we wanted him gone? I think many of you helped, she said. Steady. By saying nothing. By standing by when the papers lied. When the rumors spread. When the police stopped knocking. A murmuring ripple passed through the audience. A woman in a thick shawl, her eyes rimmed in red, stood up. Her voice broke before she even began. He saved my brother. At the clinic. He stayed after hours when no one else would see us. We couldn't pay. He never asked. I remember. I just didn't think. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, someone muttered. The priest stepped forward then, his black coat billowing behind him like a shadow. This town has its wounds, Miss Kwiatkowska. Reopening them so publicly, what purpose does it serve? Truth isn't poison, she replied. It's the cure. If you had listened then, you might have saved him. If you listen now, you might save yourselves. From the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Pavlok standing behind the last row of chairs. Her face pale. Eyes locked on the tape recorder. A young man, maybe 20, maybe less, shouted from the steps, "You're just here for pity. To make a name." No, she said. I already have a name. I came to return one you tried to erase. She pressed play again. My name is Jean-Baptiste Lamango. I came to this country because I believed in the power of education. I leave now, not because I've given up, but because you've made it clear. Silence is safer than truth. But if my daughter ever hears this, tell her she was always my voice. The recorder clicked off. Aminata stood in the silence that followed. Not triumphant. Not broken. Just present. The crowd began to move, some quietly, some angrily. A few stayed seated. One woman sobbed openly, shaking. A boy ran to her and held her hand. As the square emptied, Yannick approached. His hand trembled as he reached into his coat. He handed her an envelope. I think this was his. He used to leave books at my shop. This one. He told me to keep it safe. Inside was a pamphlet. Hand-typed. Titled On Language and Erasure. The dedication read, For Aminata. One day, the wind will carry your voice further than mine ever reached. That night, she uploaded every tape, every document, every note. She sent the files to Brussels, to Warsaw, to friends across Europe. Christian replied within hours, We're running it front page. The article would come later. The responses too. But that night in Swiatekrezu, for the first time in 30 years, someone had spoken the truth aloud. And though the village quickly closed its windows again, it had heard. That could not be undone. The morning after the reading, the village was quiet, but not in the same way. The silence no longer felt like a wall. It was porous now, thin in places. Aminata stood at the edge of the square, arms folded against the morning cold, watching as a group of teenagers crossed without avoiding her eyes. One nodded. Barely, but it was a start. She had planned to leave that day. Bags already packed, keys turned in, final messages scheduled. Yet something rooted her. At the edge of town, past the overgrown fence line near the disused railway, she walked a trail that had once been forbidden to her. Her father's voice echoed in her head from a tape labeled Forest Walks. Out here, where no one follows, I can breathe. I think about what I'll tell her when she's older. How the world is not cruel by accident. That cruelty is built into silence. She stood in the clearing he had once described. The bench was gone, rotted or stolen, but the trees still stood as they had then. Tall, bare, unflinching. There, she left one of the tapes. Wrapped in plastic. Hidden beneath a loose stone. A seed, not a relic. By the time she returned to the cottage, a message had arrived. Christian's voice buzzed through her phone. It's live. The piece is up. We included the audio clips. People are already responding. Aminata, it's powerful. She didn't open the article right away. She didn't need to see it to know it was real. Instead, she took out her own recorder. Newer, sleeker, hers. She pressed record. This is for anyone who's been told they're a guest in their own country. For every voice silenced by politeness, by fear, by history rewritten in footnotes. She paused, then continued. My father's name was Jean-Baptiste. He was not lost. He was taken, and those who took him hoped we'd be too tired to look, too scared to speak, too civilized to remember. She stopped the recording, saved it. Later, as she waited at the train station, a boy approached her, the same one who had shouted during the reading. He hesitated, then held out a crumpled paper bag. My babsha asked me to give you this, he said. Inside was a single roll, fresh, soft, glazed with honey. Bread. A peace offering. Aminata took it, nodded. Tell her thank you. The train pulled in, metal grinding on metal. She boarded, took a window seat. As Swayatakazu receded into blur, she let herself close her eyes. Not to forget, but to carry the weight without it crushing her. When she arrived back in Brussels, her inbox was full. Journalists. Academics. Descendants of others erased by similar means. Some sent letters. Some sent stories. One woman from Gdansk wrote, My uncle worked in the same department. He always said your father was the only man who ever told the truth aloud in that place. Thank you for bringing him home. Aminata started a project. The Archive of the Unnamed. A public digital library of stories like her father's, ones redacted, suppressed, or left to rot in boxes and basements. She posted every tape, every document, every diary page. Visitors could listen, read, add their own. The traffic was small at first, then steady, then global. One day, a journalist reached out for a follow-up interview. She asked Aminata if she felt justice had been done. No, she said. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about voice. And truth is its own form of resistance. The article ended with a quote from her father. They can burn the paper, but they cannot silence what's been heard. Years later, when she returned to Swayatakazu for a conference on memory and reconciliation, the square was the same. But someone had added a plaque beside the church entrance. In memory of Jean-Baptiste Lamengo, teacher, father, truth teller, silenced, but never forgotten. No ceremony, no ribbon, just words. Finally, the right ones. As she stood before it, a girl approached. Not older than 10. Is that your father? Yes. The girl nodded, thoughtful. He must have been brave. Aminata smiled. He still is.